Here's a tip for making a build volume proxy for 3D printing in Blender 3D. So once we've got all our units set up, so our objects measured the way that we want it to, so in millimeters in this case, what we can do, let's just make this a little bit bigger so that we can see this in better context. So 20 millimeters. So we're just going to route this so that it's on the grid. So that's our object that we were going to print, for example. So what we can do here is add mesh cube. That'll add another cube, and then what we can do, let's just hide. We'll hide this one just to make this easier to understand what's going on. So to make this process a little easier, view frame selected, this will be our proxy volume. So to make this easier to do, what we can do, otherwise we have to do some adjustments after the fact, which can be a little tricky. So we're just going to go into front or side view, edit mode, make sure everything is selected, and then use our widgets. So the move widget, we're just going to move this up, hold control, snap to the grid, so that the bottom face is aligned to the XY axis of the grid, and it also aligns or realigns the object's origin point to this location as well. And this is important-ish relative to what we're going to do next. So back into object mode, we're going to change the size, the physical size of this object. We're going to change its dimensions to match the size of the build volume based on the specifications of the 3D printer. So in this particular example, that will be 175 by 175, let's move out, by 165 height. So the trick, if you like, of moving the mesh relative to the origin point is that when we change the dimensions, they alter the mesh relative to the origin point. So they expand, if you like, from that point. So we don't have to do any more adjustment to our cube after the fact, because otherwise we would then have to reposition the origin and do some other shenanigans in object to reset or reposition the origin relative to our object. But anyway, once we've got this, what we can do, object properties, expand viewport display. And what we're going to do is change the display as option. It's textured at the moment. We're going to select bounds. That will change this into a wireframe. And that represents a build volume. But what we can also do to essentially lock it in place so that it doesn't move, so we don't select it accidentally and move it whilst we're working. What we can do is expand visibility, again object properties, and disable selectable. And what this will do is disable the ability to actually select the object. So we could be working in the scene, moving our object around, and we're always going to be selecting our object rather than the wireframe outline, the build volume. We can further enhance this by adding a plane. So this is the build plate or the build platform. So add mesh plane, add that in again, use dimensions to change the size. So again, 175 by 175. We need to reset this, so we need to apply it. So the scale, we need to do that to both objects actually. So select our object. Let's just select the cube. Make it selectable so that we can select it. So plane and object, object, apply, rotation and scale. That resets the scaling so it's all 1. Do the same thing for the plane, because this will matter for the next step, which is optional but useful. So that's also 1. So for the next step, what we're going to do next is subdivide the plane to represent the grid so that we can see it. So edit mode, drop in a center line, so loop cut. And then what we want to do, view, top, is drop in another couple of cuts, and then we need to loop select and position these at the extreme edge or outer border of what is the build plate. So we've got 175 millimeters, so this is point something or other. So to set this grid up, what we want to do is establish the outer border. That's what these edge loops are. They establish the outer border because it then makes the next step easier. So 80. Minus 80. 80. Minus 80. Because what we can then do, so loop cut, select our edge, and then we want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 subdivisions. 7, 7, and these will all be equidistant because we took a few moments to just set up the outer boundary. So exit into object mode, object properties, enable wireframe so that we can see the wireframe, and then if we want, as an option, add a material, just call this build plate. Just give it a color. Obviously we have to be in material preview, because otherwise, if we're in solid mode, we have to use viewport display and change the color there. So we can change it to any color we want. And then once we've got all of that set up, then we can disable selectable, and that is our build space. So that's a proxy for the build volume of the 3D printer that's being used and how it can be made in Blender.